Two frontrunners are currently entering phase 3 trials, and the two vaccines that are looking the most promising are the Moderna vaccine here in the United States and the Oxford vaccine that's also being tested. And they've entered phase 3, which basically is the phase that gives us the most amount of information and tells us whether or not we can put this vaccine out. Phase 3 is usually comprised of a large number of patients. In the case of the Moderna vaccine, it's 30,000 patients. And we look for two things mainly. We look for efficacy. So, does this vaccine work to prevent infection? And we look for safety. So, are there any safety signals that are emerging with this vaccine? And the reason we have so many patients enrolled in the trial is because if there's small safety signals, it takes a lot of people to really start to pick them up. So the journey of a vaccine really starts from preclinical development, which is really in the lab. We develop the vaccine and then we test it in animals. And then we do phase 1 and phase 2 trials in a small number of humans. And that's usually a handful of people. So for example, for the Moderna and Oxford vaccine, the phase 2 trials had somewhere in the 40s range of patients. So very few patients. And essentially what we're looking for is a proof of principle. So is the vaccine able to stimulate the immune system to make the right type of antibodies? And are there any big safety signals that are emerging even in this small number of patients? So what we found in the phase 2 trials for these drugs was that 2 doses of the vaccine, so one really wasn't enough. You needed 2 doses of the vaccine to really get enough antibodies. And the antibodies were the right type of antibodies, and they were similar to the numbers that people got when they got infected with the actual virus and recovered. So that's a really good sign. And the side effects were really minor. So people did have, flu-like symptoms, fevers, chills, muscle aches, but those were very short lasting. And the side effects seem to be coming from activation of the immune system in response to the vaccine rather than from the vaccine and the virus, obviously, itself. So I think the most common expectation with this vaccine, based on what the data that I've seen so far, would be that people should expect to feel under the weather when they get the vaccine. Now, the phase 3 trial will tell us definitively whether there's any other concerning side effects that are emerging from the virus. And essentially, we also look for something called sensitization, which means that sometimes when we give somebody a vaccine, your intent is to train the immune system on how to fight the virus, but it can paradoxically backfire, and the immune system can see the virus and think of it almost like it does like an allergy. So the next time it sees the virus, it can overreact and actually lead to a life-threatening complication. That's called sensitization. So we'll want to make sure to rule that out in phase 3. And then once the vaccine is actually marketed and administered to people, we do something called post-marketing surveillance. So our research is not done at this point. We actually look to see, in registries and databases for the people that are getting the vaccine out there, are there any unusual side effects that are emerging, particularly those long-term side effects? Because remember, this vaccine development normally takes up to 15 years, and we're doing it in the span of a few months. So it's hard to tell at this point whether this vaccine could be associated with any long-term side effects. We hope it isn't. We think it won't be, but that post-marketing surveillance really helps us to determine that. So that's the million-dollar question right now, is how long do those antibodies last in response to the vaccination? We don't even actually know how long they last in response to natural infection. What we're seeing in a New England Journal of Medicine report that just came out is that the antibodies are dropping by half every 73 days. So for a person who got infected and recovered, it is possible that those antibodies could be gone by about a year. And therefore, if we extrapolate that to the vaccine and expect a similar response, which we still have yet to confirm, we could imagine this being a vaccine that we certainly get, every year. And then furthermore, the other consideration with that is also how rapidly the virus mutates. So if the virus starts to change every year, adapting to the fact that we're immune to it, then we may need a vaccine, to help us learn how to fight the new virus. So it's hard to tell at this point whether this will be a one and done, but it seems like it will be probably more similar to an influenza type of vaccine, where we will have to get, vaccines every single year. That's a great question, and I think there's a lot of concern that people have about whether there's enough data. But I really want to reassure everyone to trust the scientific process here, because even though we're shrinking the timeline of development, this is very unlike other vaccines that we've developed in the sense that we have so many parallel tracks being at the same time. So instead of one happening, then another happening in series, which is what takes a long period of time, we have many trials ongoing in a parallel fashion, and therefore the amount of information that we get from this vaccine development research is hopefully going to be proportional to what we've seen with other trials. Now, again, there's no information on long-term data, so that is a little bit of a risk, but that's true for any new vaccine. In fact, that's even true for the flu vaccine that we get, every year. But what we know about vaccines in general is that they save lives and they improve outcomes. So it's strongly recommended that you think about getting vaccinated. That is the only way that Americans are going to put this pandemic behind us.
Right. And
So priorities are usually determined by an expert panel assembled that advises the CDC. It's usually comprised of infectious disease experts as well as epidemiologists. But in general, what determines what we do in medicine is the principle of utilitarianism, which is the greatest good for the greatest number. So we really first want to prioritize, when there's a limited resource, those that are most likely to benefit. So that would be the elderly, those who are immunocompromised, those who have chronic health conditions, and those who are the most likely to be exposed are the ones that are otherwise high risk. And these are healthcare workers, frontline workers, grocery store workers, people who really can't necessarily always participate in that stay at home. Now, eventually, hopefully it'll roll out to everybody, but those are the groups that we generally tend to prioritize first. And this is how it was done with the H1N1 pandemic. This is how it's done with organ allocation. So you really want to try to focus on who's going to get the greatest benefit from the vaccine and who is the highest risk in the population. So phase 3 trials just initiated, and from what I've read, the first look at the data by the regulatory agencies will be this October. So that'll be our first peek into whether or not this vaccine is showing both that efficacy and that safety that we talked about. But realistically, my guess is by the time we actually administer the vaccine and then monitor to see who got sick and who didn't, it'll take at least 6 months for us to collect that data. So we're looking at early next year for those vaccine trials to be completed. Now, the nice thing about Operation Warp Speed, which I do think is one of the federal responses that we have gotten right in this pandemic, is that we've already purchased a lot of doses of vaccine before we've even completed the clinical trial. So the federal government has made contracts with a number of different pharmaceutical companies to manufacture and deliver these vaccines. So the minute that the trials are completed, we're hoping to be poised and ready, if they work, to start to administer and distribute the vaccines. I think there's over 100 different vaccine candidates that are being developed, all again in different stages. There's that preclinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and that's where we're at. But the two that are the front runners are in the phase 3, and then there's 4 that are really in human trials right now that are showing promise. So 4 out of 10 Americans have said that they might say no to the vaccine because they're afraid that they could catch coronavirus from the vaccine. So I absolutely want to reassure you that the 2 vaccines that are the front runners, the Moderna and the Oxford vaccine, cannot give you coronavirus. One is what's called a messenger RNA vaccine, which means it just injects part of the genetic material of the virus into you. So it's almost just like seeing the virus's arm. It's the spike protein only. So you don't get a full virus. So there's no way to contract the infection from the vaccine. And then the second vaccine, the Oxford vaccine, is a chimpanzee virus that doesn't cause any effect in humans, that has part of the genetic code of the coronavirus as well. So again, it really can't infect you because it's not a human species virus. So when people say, oh, I felt sick after I got the vaccine, that is a normal response to the immune system revving up and getting activated and learning how to fight the infection. It's very nonspecific, the fevers, the muscle aches. It's an immune response. It's not you catching the coronavirus.